The fork slipped from James Harper's hand, clattering against the porcelain plate. The sound sliced through the hum of the air conditioner in their modest Portland, Oregon home, where the scent of roasted chicken and rosemary hung heavy. His son, Ethan, sat across the table, his 17-year-old frame rigid, his brown eyes wide with a mix of fear and defiance, waiting for a response that James couldn't yet form. "Dad, I'm gay," Ethan had said, the words tumbling out like a confession he'd rehearsed 1,000 times in his head. The silence that followed was louder than any shout, a void filled with the weight of 1,000 unspoken questions. James' wife, Laura, reached for Ethan's hand, her smile soft but strained, her blonde hair catching the glow of the chandelier. She was trying to bridge the gap, but James felt like he was sinking into quicksand. He opened his mouth, searching for words, any words, but his mind was a storm of memories he'd buried long ago. Ethan's declaration wasn't just a revelation about his son. It was a key turning in a lock James had sealed shut decades earlier. His heart pounded, not with anger, but with something far more dangerous, recognition. He'd been here before, on the other side of a table, spilling his own truth to a world that wasn't ready to hear it. "Ethan, James started, his voice rough, like gravel underfoot. But before he could finish, the front door creaked open, and a voice familiar, achingly soaked it through the tension like a blade. "James." The word was tentative, laced with disbelief, and it came from the doorway. Every head turned. Standing there, framed by the fading light of the stormy September evening, was Caleb Monroe. His dark hair was streaked with gray now, his broad shoulders slightly stooped. But those green eyes, God, those eyes were the same ones that had haunted James' dreams for 25 years. The room froze, as if time itself had stumbled. Laura's hand tightened around Ethan's. Ethan's gaze darted between his father and the stranger. And James. James felt his world tilt, the past crashing into the present like a wave he couldn't outrun. Caleb wasn't supposed to be here. Not in Portland. Not in James' house. Not now, when his son had just bared his soul. Yet there he was, carrying a bottle of wine and a nervous smile, as if he'd walked out of 1998 and straight into this dining room. James' first love. The man who'd once held his heart and then shattered it when life pulled them apart. I didn't know you'd be here," Caleb said, his voice softer now, almost breaking. He glanced at Ethan, then Laura, then back to James, his expression a mix of hope and regret. "I was just dropping by to catch up." Laura stood, her chair scraping against the hardwood. "Caleb. You're Caleb Monroe." Her tone was polite but edged with confusion. She'd heard the name before, in late-night conversations when James let slip fragments of his past. She knew Caleb was someone significant, but not how significant. Not yet. Ethan, still reeling from his own confession, leaned forward. "Dad, who is this guy?" His voice was sharp, demanding answers James wasn't ready to give. James pushed back his chair, standing to face Caleb. The air between them crackled, heavy with memories of stolen kisses in the back of Caleb's old Chevy, of promises whispered under starlit skies, of a love they'd both thought would last forever until it didn't. Until James had chosen safety, a life that fit the expectations of his small-town family, over the uncertainty of being true to himself. "Caleb," James said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why are you here?" Caleb's smile faltered, but he held James' gaze. I heard you were back in town. I needed to see you. To talk. Laura's eyes narrowed, her intuition catching the undercurrent. James, what's going on? She asked, her voice steady but probing. She wasn't accusing not yet, but she sensed the fault lines in her husband's carefully constructed world. Ethan stood now, his fists clenched. Dad, you're freaking me out. Who is this guy? And why does it feel like you're about to bolt? James looked at his son, then at Caleb, then at Laura, and felt the weight of every choice he'd ever made pressing down on him. He'd spent years building a life that looked perfect from the outside, successful contractor, devoted husband, loving father. But perfection was a fragile thing, and Ethan's courage had just cracked it open. Now Caleb's presence threatened to shatter it entirely. I need a minute, James said, his voice hoarse. He brushed past Caleb, ignoring the brush of their shoulders, and stepped out onto the porch. The cool night air hit him like a slap, but it couldn't drown out the chaos in his head. Behind him, he heard Laura calling his name, Ethan's voice rising in frustration, and Caleb's soft, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. James leaned against the railing, staring out at the rain-slicked street. He'd spent 25 years running from who he was, from the love he'd lost, from the truth he'd buried. But tonight, with his son's confession and Caleb's return, the past wasn't just knocking, it was kicking the door down. Inside, Ethan turned to Caleb, his jaw tight. You know my dad. How? And don't give me some vague crap. I just told him I'm gay, and now you show up looking like you've seen a ghost. What's the deal? Caleb hesitated, his eyes flickering to Laura, who was watching him like a hawk. It's complicated, he said finally. Your dad and I grew up together. We were close. Close how? Ethan pressed, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. Laura stepped forward, her arms crossed. Caleb, I think it's time you explained yourself. And why my husband looks like he's seen his entire life unravel. Caleb swallowed hard, clutching the wine bottle like a lifeline. I didn't come here to cause trouble. I heard James was back in Portland, and I thought maybe we could talk. About old times. About everything. Ethan's eyes widened. Old times. What? Like you guys were friends or something? He paused, his mind racing. Or more. The question hung in the air, unanswered, as the storm outside began to rumble, mirroring the tempest brewing within the Harper household. James gripped the porch railing, the wood cool and damp under his palms. The rain had started, a soft drizzle that blurred the streetlights into halos. His mind was a battlefield, memories of Caleb warring with the life he'd built, Laura's laughter, Ethan's first steps, the house they'd renovated together. He'd chosen this life, hadn't he? So why did Caleb's voice, that single word James, feel like it could undo it all? Inside, Ethan's voice grew louder, his questions sharper. You're not answering me. He snapped at Caleb, who stood awkwardly in the dining room, still holding that damn bottle of wine. What were you to my dad? Because I'm not stupid, I can see something's up. Laura placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, her touch grounding but firm. Ethan, let's all take a breath, she said, her voice calm but laced with steel. She turned to Caleb, her blue eyes piercing. But he's right. You owe us some answers. Why are you here? And why does my husband look like he's running from something? Caleb set the bottle on the table, his movements slow, deliberate. I owe you all an explanation, he said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. James and we were more than friends. A long time ago. Back in high school. In Boise. We were in love. The words landed like a thunderclap. Ethan's mouth fell open, his defiance giving way to shock. Laura's hand froze on his shoulder, her face a mask of processing emotion surprise, hurt, curiosity. She'd known James had a past, but this was a chapter he'd never shared. In love, Ethan repeated, his voice cracking. Dad, you're. He couldn't finish the sentence, his mind grappling with the revelation. He'd just come out to his father, expecting a fight, maybe acceptance, but not these a mirror of his own truth reflected back in a way he couldn't have imagined. Caleb nodded, his gaze dropping to the floor. It was the 90s. Things were different. We were young, scared. My family moved away senior year, and James, he stayed. We lost touch. I didn't know he'd built this life. He gestured vaguely at the room, at Laura, at Ethan. I didn't know about you. Laura's expression softened, but her arms remained crossed, a shield against the flood of questions. So why now? She asked. Why show up unannounced after all these years? Caleb hesitated, then met her eyes. I've been in Portland for a few months, working as a counselor. I heard James was back in town, running his construction business. I thought, maybe enough time had passed. Maybe we could at least be friends again. Ethan snorted, his shock giving way to frustration. Friends. You walk in here, drop a bomb like that, and expect to just be friends. What about Dad? What about Mom? He turned to Laura, his eyes pleading. Did you know any of this? Laura shook her head, her lips tight. No, Ethan. I didn't. She looked toward the door, where James still stood outside, his silhouette visible through the glass. But I think it's time we all talked. She stepped toward the door, her movements brisk but not angry. James, she called, her voice carrying over the rain. You need to come back in here. Now. James turned, his face pale, his eyes haunted. He stepped inside, raindrops clinging to his jacket. The room felt smaller now, the air thick with unspoken truths. He looked at Ethan, then Laura, then Caleb, and felt like a man standing on a fault line, waiting for the earth to split. Dad, Ethan said, his voice softer now, almost pleading. Is it true? Were you and him together? James swallowed, his throat dry. Yes, he said finally, the word heavy, like it had been waiting decades to be spoken. Caleb and we were together. In high school. It was real. It was. He trailed off, unable to find the right word. Everything. He wanted to say. It was everything. Laura's breath hitched, but she didn't look away. Why didn't you tell me? She asked, her voice steady but raw. All these years, James. I thought we were honest with each other. I was ashamed, James admitted, his voice barely audible. Not of Caleb. Not of what we had. But of how I handled it. I ran from it, Laura. I chose this. He gestured to the house, to her, to Ethan. I chose you. And I don't regret that. But I buried a part of myself to do it. Ethan's eyes were wet now, his anger melting into something more vulnerable. So you're like me, he said, almost a whisper. You're gay. Bi. Something. James flinched at the words, not because they were wrong, but because they were so raw, so true. I don't know what I am, Ethan, he said. I loved Caleb. I love your mom. I love you. That's all I know. Caleb stepped forward, his voice gentle. James, I didn't come here to upend your life. I needed to see you. To know you were okay. Okay. Ethan snapped, his emotions swinging back to anger. You think any of this is okay? I just told my dad I'm gay. And now I find out he's been hiding the same thing. What the hell, Dad? Were you ever gonna tell me? The question cut deeper than James expected. He opened his mouth to answer, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he looked at Caleb, and for a moment, the years fell away. He was 18 again, sitting in Caleb's truck, the radio playing softly as they planned a future they both knew was impossible. Laura broke the silence. We need to talk this through, she said, her voice firm but kind. All of us. No more secrets. She looked at Caleb. You're part of this now, whether you meant to be or not. So sit down. We're not done here. The dining room felt like a pressure cooker, the air thick with emotions nobody knew how to navigate. Laura pulled out a chair for Caleb, her gesture more command than invitation. He sat, his hands clasped tightly on the table, the wine bottle forgotten. Ethan slumped back into his seat, his eyes darting between his parents and Caleb, searching for something answers, reassurance, anything to make sense of the chaos. James stood frozen, his back against the wall, as if he could physically distance himself from the truth now spilling out. Laura's gaze pinned him in place. James, she said, her voice steady but carrying an edge of urgency. You need to start talking. Not just to me, but to Ethan. He deserves to know who you are. All of it. Ethan's jaw tightened, but his eyes were softer now, pleading. Yeah, Dad. I just told you my truth. Now you owe me yours. James ran a hand through his hair, the gesture betraying his nerves. He looked at Caleb, whose presence felt like both a lifeline and a landmine. I don't know where to start, he admitted, his voice raw. It's not like I planned to hide this forever. It just happened. Then start with him, Ethan said, nodding toward Caleb. What was it like? You and him. What happened? Caleb shifted, his discomfort palpable, but he didn't look away. Maybe I should tell this part, he offered, glancing at James for permission. James nodded, his expression a mix of relief and dread. Caleb took a deep breath, his voice low but clear. We met in sophomore year, at a school dance neither of us wanted to be at. James was this quiet kid, always sketching houses in his notebook, dreaming of building things. I was louder, I guess, always trying to prove something. He smiled faintly, the memory bittersweet. We clicked, started hanging out, and then it became more. Ethan leaned forward, his anger giving way to curiosity. More how? Like, you were boyfriends? Caleb nodded. Yeah. Secretly, though. Boise in the 90s wasn't exactly welcoming. We'd sneak off to this old quarry, just the two of us. Talk about everything: music, college, what we'd do if the world ever caught up to us. His voice cracked slightly. We thought we could make it work. So what happened? Laura asked, her tone softer now, less guarded. She wasn't just asking for Ethan, she was asking for herself. Caleb's gaze dropped to his hands. My dad got a job in Seattle. Senior year, my family moved. I wanted James to come with me, to figure it out together. But he couldn't. His family, his lifeite was all here. And I didn't push him. I should have. Maybe. But I let him go. James flinched, the words hitting like a punch. It wasn't just you, he said quietly. I made a choice. I stayed because it was easier. Because I was scared. My dad, he wouldn't have understood. Nobody would have. Ethan's eyes widened. Grandpa. He's, like, the most chill guy ever. James gave a bitter laugh. Now, maybe. Back then. He was old school. Said things about people like us that stuck with me. I didn't want to lose him. Or Mom. Or anything. Laura reached for James' hand, her touch surprising him. You could have told me, she said, her voice thick with emotion. When we met, when we got married, when Ethan was born. Any time, James. I would have listened. I know, James said, his voice breaking. But I didn't want to be that guy. The one who complicates everything. I wanted to be the husband you deserved. The dad Ethan needed. So I buried it. All of it. Ethan shook his head, his frustration bubbling up again. But you didn't bury it, Dad. It's right here, in this room. And now I'm wondering if everything I thought I knew about you is a lie. The words cut deep, and James felt his chest tighten. It's not a lie, Ethan. I love you. I love your mom. That's real. But, yeah, I hid a part of me. And I'm sorry. Caleb cleared his throat, his voice gentle but firm. Ethan, your dad's not lying about who he is now. But back then, we didn't have the words for it. Or the courage. At least, I didn't. He looked at James, his eyes full of regret. I should have fought harder for us. The room fell silent, the weight of Caleb's words settling over them. Outside, the rain pounded harder, a steady drumbeat against the windows. Laura squeezed James' hand, her eyes searching his. What do you want now, James? She asked. Because this isn't just about the past. It's about who we are moving forward. James looked at her, then at Ethan, then at Caleb. For the first time in years, he didn't have an answer. All he knew was that the life he'd built was fracturing, and the pieces his family, his past, his truth were all laid bare. Ethan stood, his chair scraping loudly. I need some air, he muttered, heading for the door. James started to follow, but Laura stopped him with a look. Let him go. she said softly. He needs time. We all do. As Ethan stepped onto the porch, the rain soaking his hoodie, James felt a pang of fear. He'd spent so long protecting his son from the world's judgment. But now he wondered if he'd failed to protect him from his own. Ethan stood on the porch, the rain drenching his clothes, his breath visible in the cool night air. The street was quiet, save for the patter of rain and the occasional rumble of thunder. He felt like he was drowning not in the rain, but in the flood of revelations that had turned his world upside down. His dad, the man he'd idolized, the one who taught him how to swing a hammer and ride a bike, had a secret life. A love Ethan never knew about. A truth that mirrored his own. Inside, James sat at the table, his hands clasped tightly, as Laura and Caleb waited for him to speak. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the distant sound of Ethan's footsteps on the porch. James wanted to run after his son, to explain, to fix this, but he didn't know how. How do you explain a life of choices made out of fear? Laura broke the silence, her voice gentle but firm. James, I need to know where we stand. You've been carrying this for years, and I get why you didn't tell me. But now it's out. So what does this mean for us? James looked at her, his heart aching. I love you, Laura. That's never been a lie. You and Ethan are my world. But seeing Caleb, he glanced at the man across the table, whose green eyes held a quiet understanding. It's like opening a door I thought I'd locked forever. Caleb leaned forward, his voice soft. I didn't come here to take anything from you, James. I just wanted closure. Maybe a chance to apologize for leaving the way I did. You don't owe me an apology, James said, his voice thick. We were kids. We did what we thought we had to. Laura's eyes flickered between them, her expression unreadable. So what now? She asked. You two have this history, and I respect that. But I'm your wife, James. And Ethan's your son. He's out there right now, probably feeling like his whole world just shifted. We need to figure this out together. James nodded, his throat tight. I know. I need to talk to Ethan first. I need to make sure he's okay. Outside, Ethan leaned against the porch railing, his phone in hand, scrolling through messages from his boyfriend, Sam, who'd been his anchor for the past 6 months, who'd held his hand when he was too scared to tell his parents the truth. Ethan had expected his dad to be shocked, maybe even angry, but he hadn't expected Thea's father who'd lived the same secret, who'd loved a man and walked away from it. Felt like a betrayal, but also a strange kind of connection. The door creaked open, and James stepped out, his jacket pulled tight against the rain. Ethan, he said softly, can we talk? Ethan didn't turn, his voice low. You lied to me, Dad. All this time, you knew what it was like, and you didn't say anything. James stood beside him, the rain soaking his hair. I didn't lie, Ethan. I didn't know how to tell you. I thought I was protecting you by keeping it buried. Protecting me? Ethan snapped, turning to face him. I'm out there, scared out of my mind, telling you I'm gay, and you've got this whole past you never mentioned. How's that protecting me? James flinched, but he didn't look away. I was scared too, Ethan. When I was your age, Being with Caleb felt like the biggest risk I'd ever taken. And when he left, I thought maybe it was a sign that I was supposed to be normal. So I built this life with your mom, with you, and it's a good life. But yeah, I hid a part of me, and I'm sorry. Ethan's eyes softened, but his voice was still sharp. So what are you now? Gay? Bi? Straight? 'Cause I don't even know who you are anymore. James took a deep breath, the rain mixing with the tears he didn't realize were falling. I don't have a label, Ethan. I loved Caleb. I love your mom. And I love you more than anything. Maybe that makes me complicated. But it doesn't change how I feel about you. Ethan looked away, his jaw tight. I just wish you'd told me. I thought I was alone in this. You're not alone, James said, his voice breaking. You'll never be alone. I promise you that. Inside, Laura and Caleb sat in awkward silence, the weight of the moment pressing down on them. Finally, Laura spoke, her voice quiet. He still loves you, doesn't he? Caleb's eyes widened, caught off guard. I don't know, he said honestly. A lot's changed. We both have. But, yeah, there's still something there. Can feel it. Laura nodded, her expression unreadable. I don't know what this means for us, she said. But I know James. He's a good man. And whatever happens, we're a family. That's what matters. The rain slowed to a drizzle, the storm outside calming as the one inside the Harper house reached its peak. James and Ethan returned to the dining room, their clothes damp, their expressions heavy with the weight of their conversation. Laura stood, her arms open, and pulled Ethan into a hug. You okay, kiddo? She whispered, her voice thick with love. Ethan nodded, his eyes red but steady. Yeah, I think so. James looked at Caleb, who was still seated, his hands clasped tightly. The air between them was electric, a mix of unresolved history and cautious hope. Laura noticed, her intuition sharp as ever. We're not done here, she said, her voice gentle but firm. But we're going to figure this out as a family. All of us. She turned to Caleb. You're welcome to stay, but this is our home. Our rules. No more surprises. Caleb nodded, his expression earnest. I understand. I'll respect whatever you decide. The next hour was a blur of conversation, raw and unfiltered. James told Ethan about his youth with Caleb, the late-night drives, the dreams they'd shared, the fear that had driven him to choose a different path. Laura listened, her heart aching but her resolve strong. Ethan shared his own story meeting Sam, falling in love, the terror of coming out. And Caleb, cautiously, spoke of his life after Boise, his work helping queer youth, his hope to make amends with the past. As the clock ticked past midnight, the tension began to ease. Ethan looked at his dad, a new understanding in his eyes. I'm still mad you didn't tell me, he said, his voice softer now. But, I get it. It's not easy. For either of us. James reached for his son's hand, squeezing it tightly. I'm proud of you, Ethan, for being braver than I ever was. Laura smiled, her eyes glistening. We're going to be okay, she said, looking at James. Then Caleb. It's messy, and it's complicated, but we're a family. We'll figure it out. Caleb stood, sensing it was time to go. I should leave you all to talk, he said, his voice quiet. But James, if you ever want to catch up, I'm here. No pressure. James nodded, his heart torn between past and present. Thanks, Caleb, for coming, for everything. As Caleb stepped out into the night, the door closing softly behind him, James felt a weight lift, not completely, but enough to breathe. He turned to Laura and Ethan, his anchors, his truth. I love you both, he said, his voice steady for the first time all night. No matter what. Ethan grinned, a spark of his usual humor returning. Yeah, well, you're stuck with me, Dad. Gay or not. Laura laughed, pulling them both into a hug. And you're both stuck with me, she said. So let's make this work. In the days that followed, the Harpers began to rebuild, not just their family but their understanding of each other. James and Laura talked late into the night, navigating the complexities of his past and their future. Ethan introduced them to Sam, his shy but kind boyfriend, and the four of them shared a tentative, hopeful dinner. Caleb became a friend, not a threat, meeting James for coffee to talk about old times and new possibilities. The storm had passed, leaving behind a clearer sky. James realized that love wasn't a zero-sum game. His heart could hold his family, his past, and the truth he'd finally embraced. Ethan, emboldened by his father's story, walked taller, knowing he wasn't alone. And Laura, steadfast as ever, held them all together, her love the glue that made them whole. In the end, the Harpers learned that family isn't about perfection, it's about honesty, forgiveness, and the courage to face the truth. Together,